You're done. Pack your things. Now. The words didn't just echo, they cut through the glass-walled boardroom like a verdict already signed. Every head turned. Every screen paused mid-slide. And at the center of it all stood Ava Monroe, still, composed, her hands resting lightly on the polished conference table as if none of it touched her. The chairman leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, watching her like the outcome had been decided hours ago. Around him, the leadership team sat in a half-circle, silent jurors in a room that suddenly felt less like a meeting and more like a courtroom. A massive 85-inch display behind Ava still showed the final slide, performance failure, executive review. Bullet points lined up like accusations. Missed projections. Leadership concerns. Cultural misalignment. Words chosen carefully. Words designed to erase. Ava didn't look at the screen. She didn't look at the faces either. She just stood there, grounded, as if the room itself rotated around her. Security, the COO said again, sharper this time, nodding toward the door. 2 uniformed guards stepped in, their presence quiet but heavy, the kind that shifted the air without raising a voice. One of them paused just a few feet away from Ava, waiting for movement that never came. A faint smirk crossed the chairman's face. You should be grateful, he added, his tone smooth, practiced. Most people don't even make it this far. A few low chuckles followed. Not loud. Not bold. Just enough to echo agreement. Ava blinked once. Slow. Measured. The kind of pause that didn't ask for permission, it created it. At the far end of the table, a young IT manager named Lucas Grant shifted in his seat, his eyes flicking between Ava and the screen, something about the moment not sitting right. The data had felt too clean. Too aligned. But no one else questioned it. No one else moved. Ava finally reached for her phone. Not rushed. Not defensive. Just deliberate. The room watched. The COO scoffed lightly. What, you calling a lawyer? Ava didn't answer. She tapped once. Then held the phone to her ear. Lucas, she said calmly, her voice low but carrying across the table like a line. Drawn in steel. Stay where you are. Lucas froze. His name, spoken like that, landed heavier than anything else in the room. The chairman's smile faded just a fraction. Ava lowered the phone, her gaze finally lifting, not to the screen, not to the chairman, but to the entire room at once. And for the first time, the silence didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to her. The room did not breathe. It waited. Ava Monroe stood exactly where they had placed her, but something had shifted, something invisible yet undeniable, like the moment before a storm changes direction. The chairman straightened slightly, his confidence no longer as relaxed as it had been seconds ago. This is unnecessary, he said, his tone tightening just enough to reveal the edge beneath. You have already been informed of the decision. Ava did not look at him. She let the silence stretch, not awkward, not uncertain, but controlled. The kind of silence that made people question what they thought they knew. One of the security guards cleared his throat softly, unsure whether to proceed. His hand hovered near his radio, but he did not move closer. He felt it too. Across the table, the chief operating officer tapped her pen against a leather notebook, the rhythm slightly off, betraying a flicker of impatience. We are on a schedule, she said. If you have personal items, we can arrange. No, Ava said quietly. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The single word landed with enough weight to stop the sentence mid-air. Heads turned again. Lucas felt it in his chest, a sudden pressure, like he had missed a step on a staircase. He glanced at his laptop screen. A notification blinked. Then another. Unauthorized access request. Internal audit channel. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. He did not type yet. He just watched. Ava's gaze moved slowly across the table now, meeting each pair of eyes, not with anger, not with defense, but with recognition. As if she had already seen this moment long before it arrived. You built a narrative, she said, her voice even, steady, cutting through the air without raising itself. You aligned numbers, shaped conclusions, and presented them as fact. The chairman scoffed lightly, though the sound lacked its earlier confidence. We followed procedure. Ava tilted her head just slightly. No, she replied. You followed assumption. A flicker crossed the room. Subtle. But real. Lucas swallowed. His screen flashed again. System override granted. He did not request it. He did not authorize it. Yet there it was. A direct line opening into the audit logs. His pulse quickened. What is happening? The chief operating officer asked, her voice sharper now, her pen no longer tapping. Ava did not answer her. Instead, she lifted her phone again, not to call, not to dial, but to confirm. A single glance. A single nod to herself. Then she spoke again, calm as ever. Lucas, she said, without turning, without needing to. Open the audit logs. Full display. The words did not sound like a request. They sounded like something already in motion. Lucas froze for half a second, his instincts pulling him in two directions, training versus intuition, authority versus truth. Then he looked up. Ava had not even turned toward him. She did not need to. He exhaled slowly, his fingers finally touching the keys. The screen behind Ava flickered. The slide disappeared. Lines of data began to replace it, timestamps, access records, modifications layered over modifications. The room shifted again, this time visibly. Chairs creaked. Eyes narrowed. The chairman leaned forward, his voice rising just enough to reclaim control. What exactly do you think you are doing? Ava finally turned to face him fully. And for the first time, there was something new in her expression. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Something sharper. Something certain. I am not doing anything, she said. I am letting your decisions speak for themselves. The first log expanded. Then another. Lucas's hands moved faster now, his hesitation gone, replaced by something else entirely. Clarity. And as the truth began to take shape on the screen, the silence in the room did not return. It fractured. The first line of truth hit the screen like a cracking glass. Timestamp. User ID. Override command. Then another. And another. Lucas leaned closer, his eyes scanning faster now, his breath shallow, his fingers no longer hesitant but precise. The pattern was no longer subtle. It was deliberate. Edits stacked on edits, each one reshaping the narrative that had just been presented as fact. Across the table, the chief operating officer shifted in her seat, her posture tightening, her pen now completely still. This does not prove anything, she said quickly, her voice sharper, faster, trying to get ahead of what was unfolding. But her words did not land the way they had before. Not with the screen behind Ava filling with undeniable detail. Ava did not respond. She let the data speak, just like she said it would. Another log expanded. This one tied directly to the performance report. A modification made less than 12 hours ago. Lucas highlighted it without thinking. The room leaned in. That was a formatting update, the chairman said immediately, too quickly, his voice cutting in before anyone else could interpret it. But Lucas shook his head slightly, almost to himself. No, he said quietly, more to the screen than the room. This changed the source inputs. Silence followed. Real silence this time. The kind that does not wait for permission to exist. Ava's eyes moved back to the chairman, steady, unwavering. You adjusted the data, she said. Not a question. Not an accusation. A statement. The chairman leaned back again, but the movement lacked the confidence it had carried before. We refined the analysis, he replied, his tone controlled, but thinner now, stretched over something less stable. Ava took a small step forward. Not aggressive. Not dramatic. Just enough to shift the balance of the room again. You rewrote the outcome, she said. Across the table, one of the senior directors glanced at the screen, then at the chairman, then back again, his expression beginning to fracture. Another voice, quieter, uncertain, came from the far end. Is this accurate? No one answered him. Because they could see it. Line by line. Entry by entry. The narrative they had all accepted moments ago was unraveling in real time. Lucas opened another file. This one linked to internal communications. A thread appeared. Names. Timestamps. Language that no longer sounded strategic, but intentional. Coordinated. The chief operating officer leaned forward now. Lucas, close that, she said, her voice low but urgent. That is restricted. Lucas did not move. His eyes flicked once toward Ava. She did not nod. She did not gesture. She simply stood there, still as ever, her presence now the only constant in a room that was beginning to shift beneath its own weight. Lucas swallowed, then clicked. The messages expanded. A sentence appeared at the top of the thread. Short. Clear. Unmistakable. We need a reason to remove her. No one spoke. Not immediately. The words sat there, glowing against the screen, heavier than any accusation that could have been said out loud. Ava's voice came next, calm as before, but now carrying something else beneath it. Finality. You built a case, she said slowly. Not from truth. From intention. The chairman opened his mouth, then stopped. For the first time since the meeting began, he did not have a response ready. The room did not feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like something collapsing in real time. And Ava Munro stood at the center of it, not louder, not more forceful, but undeniable. The words did not disappear. They stayed on the screen, steady, undeniable, like a mirror no one in the room wanted to face. We need a reason to remove her. It was no longer data. It was intent. The chairman's jaw tightened, his fingers pressing slowly into the armrest of his chair as if grounding himself in something that was slipping away. The chief operating officer shifted again, this time leaning forward with forced control. This is being taken out of context, she said, her voice measured but strained, each word placed carefully like it could still reshape the moment. Ava did not interrupt. She let the silence answer first. Around the table, eyes began to move differently now. Not toward Ava, but toward each other. Questions forming. Doubt spreading. One of the senior directors cleared his throat, his voice lower than before. I was not aware of this communication. It was a small sentence, but it cracked something open. Ava's gaze moved to him briefly, not accusing, not dismissive, just acknowledging. Then back to the screen. That is how systems fail, she said quietly. Not all at once. But piece by piece. Silence by silence. Lucas scrolled again, his movement steady now, committed. Another thread surfaced. More messages. More coordination. The timestamps lined up with the report revisions. The pattern was no longer a question. It was structure. Built. Maintained. Protected. Stop this, the chairman said suddenly, his voice sharper now, no longer controlled. This is a breach of internal protocol. Lucas froze for a fraction of a second, the weight of that statement hitting hard. But before he could react, Ava spoke again. Protocol exists to protect the company, she said. Not to protect misconduct. The room shifted again. Subtle, but irreversible. The security guards near the door exchanged a glance, their stance no longer forward, no longer pressing. They were no longer moving toward Ava. They were watching the room. The chief operating officer stood up halfway from her chair, then stopped, as if unsure what standing would even accomplish now. You are escalating this unnecessarily, she said, but her voice no longer carried authority. It carried urgency. Ava took another small step forward, closing the space between herself and the table, not aggressively, but deliberately, like someone reclaiming ground that had never truly been taken. No, she replied. You escalated it when you decided the outcome before the truth. Lucas opened one final file. This one did not contain messages. It contained approvals. Digital signatures. Authorization chains. The screen filled with names. Titles. Decision points. The leadership team. Every single one of them. The room went still. Completely still. Ava let the moment settle, let every person see their own reflection in the system they thought they controlled. Then she spoke again, her voice steady, grounded, final. This was not a mistake, she said. It was a decision. The chairman leaned forward again, but there was no confidence left in the movement. Only reaction. You are overstepping, he said, but even he seemed to hear how hollow it sounded. Ava looked at him directly now, her expression calm, but something beneath it had fully shifted. Not rising. Not emotional. Just clear. No, she said. I am stepping exactly where I am supposed to. And for the first time since the meeting began, no one tried to stop her. No one reached for their phone. No one interrupted. The room had crossed a line it could not step back from, and everyone felt it settling in, heavy and undeniable. Ava Monroe stood at the edge of the table, her posture unchanged, her expression steady, but now there was something else in the air around her, something that no title had introduced and no slide had prepared them for. Ownership of the moment. The chairman exhaled slowly, forcing a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. Even if this were true, he began, choosing each word carefully, you still answer to this board. It was the first time he had tried to reclaim structure, to rebuild authority from the fragments left on the table. Ava did not respond immediately. She let the statement sit, let it echo just long enough for everyone else to hear what it really sounded like. Across the table, one of the directors shifted in his seat, his gaze dropping to the documents in front of him as if they no longer meant what they had 5 minutes ago. Lucas remained still, his hands resting lightly on the keyboard now, no longer searching, no longer proving, because the proof had already spoken. Ava finally moved again, not away, not back, but forward, her hand resting flat against the table surface, grounding the room in something real. You are right, she said calmly. Leadership answers to the board. The chairman nodded once, quick, eager to anchor himself to that agreement. But Ava did not stop. But the board answers to ownership. The words landed differently. Slower. Heavier. The kind that did not need volume to carry impact. A flicker moved across the faces around the table. Confusion at first. Then recognition. Then something closer to realization. The chief operating officer straightened abruptly. What are you implying? She asked, but her voice had already lost its edge. Ava's eyes moved across the room again, taking in every reaction, every shift in posture, every silent recalculation. I am not implying anything, she said. I am reminding you of the structure you chose to ignore. The chairman leaned forward again, but this time there was no confidence in the motion, only urgency. You are an executive, he said, his voice tightening. A replaceable one. Ava held his gaze, unblinking. That is where you made your first mistake. Silence followed. Not the silence of hesitation, but the silence of something breaking open. Lucas felt it again, that same drop in his chest, like gravity had shifted direction. Ava reached for her phone once more, her movements as controlled as every word she had spoken. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She tapped once, then turned the screen outward, not dramatically, not for effect, but simply to share what had already been set in motion. A notification appeared. Then another. System-wide. Board level. Legal channel. The titles alone were enough to shift the air in the room again. The chairman's expression changed, not all at once, but in layers, confidence peeling back into something far more uncertain. "What did you do?" he asked, quieter now, the question no longer carrying authority, only need. Ava lowered the phone slightly, her voice steady, grounded, final. "I did not do anything," she said. "I just stopped letting you control the narrative." And for the first time since the meeting began, the power in the room did not feel shared. It felt centered. Entirely, unmistakably, in her. The air in the boardroom no longer felt controlled. It felt exposed. The kind of exposure that did not come from raised voices or sudden movement, but from the quiet realization that everything had already shifted. Ava Monroe stood steady, her phone still in her hand, her presence no longer questioned but not yet fully understood. Across the table, the chairman's fingers tightened against the edge of the polished surface, his knuckles paling slightly as he tried to hold onto something that was no longer there. "You are overplaying this," he said, but his voice lacked the certainty it once carried. It sounded like someone repeating a line they no longer believed. Ava did not respond immediately. She let the weight of his words fall on its own. Around the room, the leadership team had stopped looking at her as an individual. They were looking at the system. At the logs. At the messages. At themselves. One of the directors leaned back slowly, his eyes fixed on the screen, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is going to trigger a full audit." No one dismissed him. No one corrected him. Because they all knew he was right. Lucas shifted again, his screen now flooded with incoming alerts, confirmation stacking in real time. Legal channels opening. Compliance notifications activating. The infrastructure of the company itself responding. He looked up, his voice quiet but clear. "External oversight has been notified." The words landed like a second fracture. The chief operating officer stood fully now, her chair sliding back with a sharp sound that broke the stillness. "You had no authority to escalate this outside the room," she said, her voice rising, trying to reclaim control through volume. Ava turned her head slightly, meeting her gaze without urgency. "Authority does not disappear when it is ignored," she said calmly. The statement settled deeper than any argument. The security guards near the door adjusted their stance again, no longer positioned as enforcers, but as observers caught between roles. One of them glanced toward the chairman, waiting for direction that did not come. The chairman's eyes moved across the room, searching for alignment, for support, for anything that still held. But the room was no longer aligned with him. It was recalculating. "This is not how governance works," he said finally, but the sentence fell apart as he said it, each word carrying less weight than the last. Ava stepped forward again, closing the distance between herself and the center of the table. Not aggressively. Not forcefully. Just enough to redefine where the center actually was. "This is exactly how governance works," she replied. "When it is not being manipulated." A notification sound echoed softly from multiple devices around the room. Emails. Alerts. Confirmations. The system was no longer contained within those walls. It was expanding outward, beyond the control of anyone sitting at that table. Lucas glanced down again, then back up, his expression no longer uncertain. "Board oversight just acknowledged receipt," he said. "They are requesting immediate clarification from executive leadership." No one answered him. Because there was no longer a clear answer to give. Ava let the silence stretch one more time, letting every person in the room sit with what had already begun. Then she spoke again, her voice steady, unshaken, and absolute. "You wanted to make a decision about me," she said. "Now the system is going to make a decision about all of you." And this time, no one tried to interrupt her. The room did not argue anymore. It absorbed. Every notification, every shift in posture, every glance that no longer landed where it used to. Ava Monroe stood unmoved, but the space around her felt different now, like gravity had quietly chosen a new center. The chairman exhaled slowly, longer this time, his composure no longer something he controlled, but something he was trying to hold together. You are creating unnecessary exposure for this company, he said, his tone lower, more measured, as if calm could still restore order. Ava did not react to the warning. She let the word exposure sit in the air, turning it over without touching it. Exposure does not create risk, she said finally. It reveals it. The sentence settled across the table like a line no one could step around. Across from her, the chief operating officer pressed her palms flat against the table, leaning forward slightly, her voice now sharper with urgency. This can still be contained, she said. We can resolve this internally. Ava's eyes moved to her, steady, unreadable. You had that option, she replied. You chose something else. Lucas glanced at his screen again, then back up, his voice cutting through the silence with quiet precision. Audit escalation has been accepted at the enterprise level, he said. They are pulling access logs across all executive channels. That changed something. Not just the room. The timeline. What had been a contained confrontation was now becoming a record. Permanent. Traceable. The chairman's posture shifted again, this time forward, his voice tightening with controlled urgency. Then we pause this meeting, he said. Effective immediately. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Because even that decision no longer felt entirely his to make. Ava tilted her head slightly, almost as if considering the statement. You can pause a meeting, she said calmly. You cannot pause a process once it has started. The distinction landed hard. One of the directors leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly now, his voice uncertain. What exactly has been triggered? He asked. Not to challenge. To understand. Ava answered without hesitation. Full governance review, she said. Executive conduct audit. Data integrity verification. And legal oversight. Each phrase fell like a step downward. No one interrupted. No one corrected. Because the structure she described was real. And it was already moving. A soft vibration echoed across the table as multiple devices lit up again. Messages from compliance. Requests for statements. System confirmations. The infrastructure was no longer waiting for permission. It was documenting. The chief operating officer glanced at her phone, then quickly turned it face down, as if that could delay what was already in motion. You escalated this beyond proportional response, she said, but even she seemed to hear how distant that argument sounded now. Ava took one slow breath, her posture unchanged, her voice steady. There is no proportional response to a system that has been compromised, she said. The word compromised lingered. Not loud. But irreversible. The chairman looked around the room again, but this time there was no alignment to find. No silent agreement to lean on. Only individuals sitting with the same realization at different speeds. That this was no longer about Ava. It was about them. The security guards remained at the door, still, uncertain, no longer waiting for instruction, because there was no clear authority left to follow. Lucas leaned back slightly, his hands finally leaving the keyboard, his voice quieter now, but more certain than before. They are requesting executive statements within the hour, he said. Individually. That word shifted everything again. Individually. No shared narrative. No unified defense. Just accountability. Ava let the silence stretch one last time, letting the room feel the weight of what had already begun. Then she spoke, her voice calm, precise, and final. You built this room to control decisions, she said. You forgot it could also hold you accountable. And this time, no one in that room had an answer. The room held its breath, but not out of control anymore. It was something else now, something heavier, like the moment after a truth is spoken and cannot be taken back. Ava Monroe did not move. She did not need to. The system was moving for her. Slowly, deliberately, like a machine that had finally been given the right command. Around the table, the leadership team no longer looked unified. They looked separated. isolated in their own thoughts, their own calculations, their own quiet realization that whatever protection they believed existed was already gone. The chairman adjusted his jacket, a small motion, but one that betrayed more than he intended. "We need to realign," he said, his voice lower now, no longer trying to dominate the room but to stabilize it. "We need to present a unified position before this escalates further." Ava's eyes shifted to him, not sharply, not aggressively, but with a clarity that made the words feel outdated the moment they were spoken. "There is no unified position," she said. "There is only what each of you chose to do." That landed deeper than anything before it. Because it removed the shield. No more group decisions. No more shared responsibility. Just individual actions, exposed one by one. One of the directors leaned forward, his hands now clasped tightly together, his voice quieter than before. "If statements are required individually," he said slowly, "then we need context. We need time." Ava shook her head once, subtle, controlled. "You had time," she replied. "You used it to build a case." The words were not loud, but they carried the weight of finality. Lucas glanced at his screen again, then hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There is more," he said. The room turned toward him. Not because he was the most powerful voice, but because he was now the clearest one. He tapped a few keys, then stopped, as if even he needed a second to process what he was seeing. "Historical logs," he continued. "Not just from this review. Prior evaluations. Prior overrides." The chairman's head snapped slightly in his direction. "That is not relevant," he said quickly. Too quickly. Lucas did not respond to him. He expanded the file. The screen behind Ava shifted again. New entries appeared. Older timestamps. Patterns that stretched beyond a single meeting, beyond a single decision. A system of behavior. Quiet. Consistent. Repeated. Ava did not turn to look at the screen this time. She did not need to. She had already seen it. Already known it. Instead, her gaze remained on the people in the room, watching them see it for the first time. One of the directors leaned back slowly, his face pale, his voice barely above a whisper. "This has happened before." No one corrected him. Because the evidence was right there. Line after line. Decision after decision. Similar language. Similar outcomes. The chief operating officer looked at the screen, then quickly away, her composure slipping just enough to be noticed. "This is a misinterpretation of data," she said, but her voice no longer carried conviction. Ava finally spoke again, her tone steady, but now carrying something deeper. Not just control. Not just authority. History. "No," she said. "This is a pattern." The word settled into the room like something that had always been there, waiting to be named. Lucas scrolled further. Another entry. Another override. Another decision that looked too familiar to ignore. The system was not just revealing a moment. It was revealing a structure. The chairman leaned back slowly, his eyes no longer sharp, no longer certain. Just calculating. But even that calculation felt late. Ava took a slow breath, her voice calm, grounded, and unmistakably clear. "You did not just make a decision today," she said. "You repeated one." And this time, no one in that room could pretend they did not understand what she meant. The word pattern did not fade. It expanded. It stretched across the screen, across the years. Across decisions that had once seemed isolated but now aligned with unsettling precision. Ava Monroe stood still, her presence no longer just part of the room, but the point everything else was now revolving around. No one questioned that anymore. Not openly. Not even silently. The chairman leaned forward again, slower this time, his voice measured but thinner than before. "You are drawing conclusions from incomplete data," he said, but even he seemed to hear how fragile that sounded against what was displayed. Ava did not look at the screen. She looked at him. Directly. Then complete it, she said. The simplicity of the response landed harder than any argument. Lucas did not hesitate this time. His fingers moved again, opening another layer, another archive. The system responded immediately, as if it had been waiting. A new set of records appeared. Performance reviews. Internal flags. Escalation notes that had been quietly redirected, softened, or dismissed. Names changed. But the structure stayed the same. The language stayed the same. The outcome stayed the same. One of the directors leaned forward, his voice unsteady now. These were never brought to full review. It was not a question. It was realization. Ava nodded once. No, she said. They were redirected. The chief operating officer shook her head quickly, her composure slipping further. That is not accurate, she said. There are processes in place for. Ava cut through the sentence without raising her voice. Processes only work when they are followed. Silence followed. Immediate. Absolute. The kind that did not wait for permission. Lucas scrolled again, and this time he stopped on a single entry. He did not expand it right away. He just stared at it. Then he spoke, quieter than before, but with a clarity that cut through everything else. This one was flagged for executive review, he said. It never reached the board. The room shifted again. The chairman's eyes narrowed slightly. Open it, he said, but the command no longer carried authority. It carried tension. Lucas clicked. The file expanded. A name appeared. A profile. A recommendation. Strong performance. High potential. And then a note. Short. Dismissive. Final. Not aligned with leadership culture. Ava did not move. But something in the room did. One of the directors looked at the screen, then slowly turned his head toward the chairman, his voice low, controlled, but unmistakably different now. How many times has this language been used? No one answered him. Because they were all looking at the same thing. And they all knew the answer was not going to be small. Ava's voice came next, steady, grounded, and precise. You did not just repeat a decision, she said. You repeated a standard. The words settled deeper than anything before them. Because now it was no longer about a single action. It was about a system that had been allowed to exist. The chief operating officer stepped back slightly, her posture no longer forward, no longer defensive, just uncertain. You are turning this into something it is not, she said, but the words lacked direction. Ava's gaze moved across the room again, slower now, deliberate. No, she said. I am naming it. That was the shift. Not louder. Not dramatic. Just clear. And clarity, in that moment, carried more weight than anything else. Lucas leaned back slightly, his hands no longer moving because there was nothing left to uncover. The system had already revealed itself. The chairman looked around the table again, but this time there was no calculation left in his expression. Only recognition. Late. But undeniable. Ava took a slow breath, her voice calm, final, and impossible to dismiss. You tried to define who belongs in leadership, she said. Now the record is going to define you. And this time, no one in that room looked away from the screen. The room no longer felt like a place where decisions were made. It felt like a place where decisions were being revealed. Ava Monroe stood at the center of it, calm, unshaken, her presence no longer questioned but not yet fully understood by everyone in the room. The chairman sat still, his posture rigid now, his earlier confidence replaced by something quieter, something more cautious. He looked at the screen, then back at Ava, as if trying to reconcile two versions of reality that no longer aligned. You are making a claim without authority, he said finally, but even his tone suggested he was no longer certain of that statement. Ava held his gaze, steady, composed. No, she said. I am exercising it. The distinction landed immediately. Across the table, one of the directors leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. Authority from where? He asked. It was the question the room had been circling, the one no one had said out loud until now. Ava did not rush to answer. She let the silence stretch just enough to let the weight of the question settle. Then she reached into her bag, her movement slow, deliberate, controlled. No theatrics. No urgency. Just certainty. She placed a thin black folder on the table. The sound was soft, but in that room, it carried. Every eye moved to it. The chairman frowned slightly, his attention locked. "What is this?" he asked. Ava opened the folder and turned it outward, not dramatically, not to prove a point, but simply to present what had always been there. Inside were documents. Not many. But enough. Signed agreements. Ownership filings. Board resolutions. The kind that did not need explanation once seen. Lucas leaned slightly to the side, catching a glimpse, his breath catching just enough to be heard. One of the directors stood halfway from his chair, his voice barely above a whisper. That cannot be. Ava did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the chairman. You asked where the authority comes from, she said calmly. It comes from here. The chairman did not respond immediately. His eyes moved across the documents, scanning, recalculating, trying to find something that did not align. But everything aligned. Perfectly. His jaw tightened slightly. These filings are not operational, he said, grasping for structure, for limitation. Ava tilted her head just slightly. They are foundational, she replied. Silence followed. Not the silence of confusion this time. The silence of recognition. One of the directors sank back into his chair slowly, his voice unsteady. Majority stakeholder, the words did not need to be finished. The room understood. The chief operating officer's posture changed instantly, her earlier urgency. Replaced by something sharper, something more cautious. If that is true, she said slowly, then this changes the structure of authority in this room. Ava nodded once. It does not change it, she said. It clarifies it. The distinction landed with finality. Lucas looked down at his screen again, then back up, his voice quieter now, but filled with certainty. Ownership records match, he said. It is verified. That was the moment everything shifted completely. Not gradually. Not subtly. Completely. The chairman leaned back slowly, his hands no longer gripping the table, his posture no longer defensive. Just still. Processing. Ava closed the folder gently, her voice calm, grounded, and absolute. You tried to remove me from a company you do not control, she said. Now you understand why that was never going to work. And for the first time since the meeting began, no one in that room questioned her authority. No one spoke immediately. The weight of the truth did not invite reaction. It demanded adjustment. Ava Monroe stood where she had always stood, but now the room had moved around her, realigned itself without asking permission. The chairman's silence stretched longer than before, his eyes no longer searching for flaws in the documents, but measuring the consequences of what they meant. Across the table, the chief operating officer slowly lowered herself back into her chair, her posture no longer assertive, no longer defensive, but recalibrating. If ownership is confirmed, one of the directors said carefully, his voice controlled but uncertain, then the authority exercised in this meeting is invalid. The sentence hung in the air like a formal correction. Ava did not nod. She did not need to. The room was already adjusting to that reality. Lucas glanced at his screen again, then spoke, quieter but precise. Legal has updated the session status, he said. This meeting is no longer classified as a termination review. It is now flagged as a governance incident. That changed the tone completely. Not just the room, but the meaning of everything that had already happened inside it. The chairman exhaled slowly, his shoulders settling back as if he finally understood that control was no longer something he could reclaim. Then we need to move forward constructively, he said, his voice lower, measured, no longer commanding but negotiating. Ava's eyes met his, calm, steady, unchanged. You are already moving forward, she replied. You just are not leading it anymore. The distinction was sharp. Final. Around the table, the directors began to shift again, but this time it was not resistance. It was alignment. Not with the chairman. With reality. One of them spoke up, his tone careful but direct. If this is a governance incident, then we are required to document actions taken by executive leadership during this session. Another nodded slightly. And we are required to respond individually. The earlier word returned. Individually. It carried more weight now than before. The chief operating officer looked at Ava, her expression tight, her voice controlled but edged with something new. What exactly are you intending to do? She asked. It was not a challenge. It was a question asked from a different position entirely. Ava took a slow breath, her posture grounded, her voice steady and clear. I am not intending anything, she said. I am responding. The simplicity of the statement shifted the room again. Because it removed any illusion of strategy or reactionary behavior. This was not escalation. This was correction. Lucas's screen lit up again, another notification arriving with quiet finality. He looked down, then back up, his voice calm but definitive. Board Oversight has issued a directive, he said. Every eye turned toward him. They are suspending executive decision authority for all individuals named in the audit logs pending review. Silence followed. Not confusion. Not tension. Just recognition. The chairman closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, his expression no longer resistant, no longer defensive. Just still. The chief operating officer did not speak. She did not need to. The directive had already said everything. Ava let the moment settle fully, letting every person in the room understand exactly where they now stood. Then she spoke, her voice calm, precise, and absolute. You tried to make a decision about leadership, she said. Now leadership is going to be decided without you. And this time, no one in that room questioned what came next. The directive did not echo. It settled. Quietly, completely, like a final piece clicking into place. Ava Monroe did not move, but the room understood that everything from this moment forward would move around her authority, not against it. The chairman remained seated, his posture no longer rigid, no longer commanding, just still, absorbing what had already been decided beyond him. The chief operating officer stared at the table for a moment longer than necessary, then slowly looked up, her voice controlled but stripped of its earlier certainty. So what happens now? She asked. It was not defiance. It was recognition. Ava let the question sit for a moment, not out of hesitation, but to let the room feel its weight. Then she answered, calm and precise. Now the structure corrects itself. Across the table, one of the directors nodded slowly, almost to himself, as if the sentence aligned with something he had already begun to understand. Lucas glanced at his screen again, his voice steady, no longer uncertain. Access privileges are updating in real time, he said. Executive-level permissions for flagged individuals are being restricted. The words landed with quiet finality. No alarms. No raised voices. Just systems adjusting to truth. One of the directors attempted to open a file on his tablet, then paused, his expression shifting as the access request failed. He looked up, not confused, but aware. It has already started, he said softly. Ava did not respond. She did not need to confirm what was already visible. The chairman exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, his voice quieter than it had ever been. This was avoidable, he said. Ava's gaze moved to him, steady, unwavering. Yes, she replied. It was. The simplicity of the exchange carried more weight than anything louder could have. The chief operating officer straightened slightly, her voice careful now, measured. If authority has shifted, then leadership continuity needs to be addressed immediately. Ava nodded once. It already has been. The room stilled again. Lucas looked down at his screen, then spoke, each word clear. Interim executive authority has been reassigned, he said. Effective immediately. A pause. Then, quieter but unmistakable. To Ava Monroe. That was the moment the last layer fell away. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just complete. One of the directors leaned back slowly, his expression no longer tense, just resolved. Then this meeting is no longer under previous leadership, he said. No one disagreed. Because there was nothing left to argue. Ava took a single step forward, not to claim space, but to redefine it. Her voice remained calm, grounded, but now it carried the full weight of authority that no one in the room could question anymore. This session is now under my direction, she said. All prior decisions made in this meeting are null pending review. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They were final. The chairman closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, not in resistance, but in acceptance. The chief operating officer said nothing. She simply sat back, her posture no longer leading, no longer resisting. Just present. Ava looked across the room one last time, her gaze steady, her tone unchanged. You tried to define leadership by exclusion, she said. Now leadership is being defined by accountability. And this time, the room did not shift. It settled exactly where it was supposed to be. No one rushed to stand. No one reached for the door. The room remained exactly as it was, but everything inside it had been redefined. Ava Monroe stood at the head of the table now, not because she moved there, but because the center had shifted to her. The polished surface, the glass walls, the quiet hum of the building beyond them all felt different, like the space itself had recalibrated around a truth that could no longer be ignored. The chairman sat still, his hands resting loosely now, no longer gripping for control, his expression no longer defensive, just reflective. The chief operating officer remained silent, her posture composed but no longer leading, her focus fixed somewhere between the table and the realization settling in. Around them, the directors sat in a rare stillness, not out of confusion, but out of clarity. The kind that comes only after resistance has nowhere left to go. Ava let the silence breathe for a moment longer, not to extend tension, but to allow understanding to fully arrive. Then she spoke, her voice calm, steady, and grounded in something deeper than authority alone. This company was not built to protect comfort, she said. It was built to deliver results, to create opportunity, and to uphold standards that do not change depending on who is in the room. No one interrupted. No one shifted. Because the words did not feel like a speech. They felt like a correction. Ava's gaze moved across the table, meeting each person where they now sat, not as opponents, not as obstacles, but as individuals who had just been forced to confront something larger than themselves. What happened here today, she continued, was not a failure of policy. It was a failure of judgment. The distinction settled quietly but firmly. One of the directors nodded once, almost instinctively, as if the sentence aligned with something he had already begun to accept. Ava took a slow breath, her posture unchanged, her presence steady. And judgment, she added, is what defines leadership when no one is watching. Lucas sat back in his chair, his hands now still, his role complete, but his expression different than when the meeting began. More certain. More aware. The system had spoken, but so had the truth behind it. Ava glanced briefly toward him, then back to the room. From this point forward, she said, every decision made in this company will be traceable, accountable, and aligned with the standards we claim to represent. Her voice did not rise. It did not need emphasis. It carried its own weight. The chairman exhaled slowly, nodding once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. The chief operating officer lowered her gaze slightly, absorbing the words without response. Ava let the moment settle completely before she spoke again, her tone final, but not harsh, firm without force. You did not fail because you lacked authority, she said. You failed because you misused it. The words did not accuse. They defined. And in that definition, there was no room left for interpretation. Ava straightened slightly, her presence now fully established, not through declaration, but through everything that had unfolded. This is not the end of a meeting, she said. It is the beginning of accountability. The room did not react. It did not need to. Because for the first time since the doors had closed, everything inside it was exactly where it was supposed to be.